The Bell family returns to a house haunted by an indescribable dark force. Every night, strange noises and eerie shadows stalk them. Now, after years on the run, they must face the darkness, or lose everything. Can they defeat the unseen terror and find the peace they've long lost? Year 1817. Morning in Adams, Tennessee was as quiet as ever. A soft mist still clung to the Bell family's farmland, drifting like a lost spirit unsure of its way home. John Bell, the respected head of the household in that small community, had just finished planting corn seeds in the field. Nothing seemed unusual that day except for one thing. Their dogs were barking uncontrollably, all facing the woods behind the house. That night, as the Bell family gathered in the dining room, a strange noise echoed from the attic above. It sounded as though someone, or something, was dragging a heavy object across the floor. John Bell immediately stood, grabbed an oil lamp and cautiously climbed the stairs. But when he opened the attic door, all he found was an empty room, blanketed in dust and cobwebs. "There's nothing up there," he muttered, trying to convince himself as he descended. But that night marked the beginning of something far more terrifying. While sleeping, the children, Betsy and her younger siblings, were awakened by the sound of someone whispering their names in the dark. Not only that, but their blankets were yanked off them with invisible force, and a bone-deep chill filled the room, something unnatural. Betsy cried. John tried to comfort the children, believing it was just a bad dream. But when Mary, his wife, noticed that more and more objects in the house moved on their own each night, and persistent knocks echoed from the walls with no clear source, they began to sense this was no longer a matter of the natural world. "John, I think something else is living here with us," Mary whispered one night, clutching a small cross in her hand. John Bell looked into his wife's eyes, filled with doubt, and a fear slowly blooming in his chest. He tried to deny it, but deep down he knew, whatever it was already inside their home. And it had no intention of leaving. The following nights became a nightmare for the Bell family. The mysterious knocking no longer came only from the walls. It now echoed from the windows, the doors, and even from beneath the wooden floorboards they walked on. What began as a faint tap had grown louder and more rhythmic, like a message they couldn't comprehend. Talk, 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 talk. Mary Bell began to keep track of the knocking pattern, hoping to decipher something. But every night the pattern changed. One night, when the silence was so thick, the knocks formed a sound like footsteps, slowly moving from the front room to Betsy's bedroom. And when Betsy awoke from the noise, she saw something standing in the corner of her room. An old woman. Her hair was tangled and long, her face as pale as ash, and her eyes empty. She just stood there, staring at Betsy, who was too terrified to scream. Then the figure floated backward and vanished into the wall. The next morning, Betsy told her mother. Mary fell silent, her face drained of color. She, too, had seen the same woman in the kitchen the night before, but she had convinced herself it was just a hallucination from lack of sleep. "This isn't just a ghost. This isn't an ordinary restless spirit," Mary muttered, clutching her cross with trembling hands. John Bell, who could no longer hide his fear, finally shared what he had experienced 2 days earlier. While hunting in the woods behind their home, he had seen a large black dog with glowing red eyes. He shot it, but the creature vanished into the air like smoke. That night, as they all gathered in the living room, the dim oil lamp casting faint shadows and prayers murmured endlessly, the knocking returned. But this time it wasn't just any knock. Someone, or something, screamed from the attic, a woman's voice wailing as if in torment. "John Bell, you are mine." The children screamed. Mary held them tight. John, who had tried to remain strong, stood frozen, sweat dripping down his neck. They knew this was not merely a disturbance. This was a threat. After that night of the wailing scream, the Bell family's house felt colder than ever, not just because of the autumn air that began to bite, but because something inside that house made their very souls shiver. John Bell started experiencing strange symptoms. His throat felt tight as if being choked by an invisible hand. He began to have trouble speaking, and his body grew weak, as though his energy was being drained away each morning. But he hid this from his family, with only Mary knowing that his condition was getting worse. However, it was Betsy who suffered the most. One night, as Betsy lay asleep, she woke up to feel her hair being harshly tugged from behind. She shot up with a scream, and in front of her panicked family, her body was slammed to the floor by an unseen force. Her left cheek suddenly turned bruised. Her neck felt like it was being strangled. Her hands clawed at the air, trying to break free from something she couldn't see. Mary screamed, trying to hold her daughter, but Betsy's body was flung again into the wall. Her voice choked, and all who watched could only cry in fear. After that incident, bruises began appearing on Betsy's body, scratches, even marks that looked like handprints. But when the doctor was called, he couldn't explain anything. "There's no illness," he said. "It's like the result of violence." But who did this? John began seeking help. He invited a pastor and several well-respected neighbors to pray together. As they prayed, loud laughter echoed through the house as if an old woman was mocking them. Some of the guests felt their hair being pulled, their clothes slapped, and heard a rough voice whisper in their ears, "Leave here. This is not your concern." One afternoon, Betsy sat quietly by the river at the back of the house, staring at the calm flow of water. Mary found her there, pale and dazed. "What did you see, darling?" Mary asked softly. Betsy slowly turned to her, speaking in a faint voice. "She wants me to die, Mom. She said that only then will Dad pay for it." Mary froze. Her heart seemed to stop beating. Pay for what? Revenge? What had John Bell done in the past that caused this spirit to want to destroy their family? That morning, John Bell sat lost in thought on his old wooden chair, staring at the empty field slowly being swallowed by the fog. His eyes were bloodshot, his face paler than usual. He could no longer hide the strange symptoms plaguing his body. His hands often went numb, his tongue felt stiff, and his throat grew tighter by the day as if being choked from the inside. After the incident with Betsy, when she was brutally slammed by an invisible force, the small town of Adams began whispering about the Bell family. Some of the neighbors became too afraid to visit, even to offer help. But one elderly woman from the village, a widow named Martha Powell, finally came to see Mary with a serious expression on her face. "I think you need to know," she said, sitting in the cold living room, "about a woman named Kate Batts." Mary froze. That name sounded familiar. Martha continued, "Kate was your neighbor long ago? She was known to be strange, eccentric, and often accused people of treating her unfairly, especially John." Mary glanced at her husband. John was silent, eyes closed. "We all knew Kate believed John had cheated her over land, paying below market value and taking some of her inheritance. She was furious, very angry. But people back then thought she was crazy. She died alone and angry." Martha grasped Mary's hand. Before she died, she swore, "My soul won't rest until John Bell suffers. I will return. I will make him feel what it's like to be stolen from and destroyed." And now Mary knew, this was no random haunting. This was a carefully crafted vengeance from the realm of death. That night, John confessed everything to his wife. I needed that land. For us, for the children. But I cheated her. I thought she'd never fight back. She was just a woman, alone." Mary looked at him with a mix of disappointment and horror. Her husband, the man she had respected, had carried a sin that now called upon the spirits to live with them. As night fell and they all began to pray, the voice returned. But this time it wasn't just laughter or screams, it was the voice of a woman speaking with full fury. "The sin you sowed has now borne fruit. I've come to collect." And as John Bell tried to stand, his body seemed to be slammed down by an invisible force. He groaned, twisted, clutching at his own throat, unable to touch or be helped by anyone. Kate Batts had returned. And she was not finished. Days passed and the strange occurrences continued to escalate. John Bell, once a strong and respected man, grew weaker with each passing day. His body seemed to be drained of life, and his once pale face became even more ghostly as the days wore on. The villagers began to keep their distance, with only a few brave souls daring to check on the Bell family. But the disturbances were no longer confined to the house. They began to spill out into the village. One afternoon, a man named James Johnson, a farmer who lived near the Bell household, walked down the quiet street toward his home. Suddenly he felt a strange sensation, like someone was following him. The heavy, harsh footsteps, far louder and more menacing than any human could make, echoed from behind. When he turned around, he saw a tall, shadowy figure, vaguely feminine, glowing faintly but with no discernible features. It vanished the moment he tried to approach it. Fear gripped him. James ran home, trembling, and told his wife about the encounter. She too had begun to feel something was wrong with the village lately. People whispered more often about the Bell family, and many feared they too might fall victim to whatever curse had befallen them. That same night, Pastor Joseph from the local church decided to visit the Bell household. He had heard from the neighbors that the malevolent force tormenting the Bells was growing increasingly uncontrollable, and he felt compelled to help. Inside the house, he began to lead the family in prayer, reading verses from the Bible, hoping to drive away the evil spirit that had taken over the house. But as he recited the holy words, a chilling laugh echoed throughout the room, a laugh filled with malice and hatred. "Leave," the voice shouted, shaking the walls. The voice they all recognized as Kate Batts. Suddenly, a chair from the living room flew across the room, narrowly missing the pastor's head. He staggered back, falling to the floor, terror-stricken. "My soul will not leave," the voice boomed louder than before, causing the entire house to tremble. It wasn't just the Bell family that was terrified. Those villagers who had gathered with the pastor now felt the full weight of the malevolent force. They tried to flee, but the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside the house with the vengeful spirit. In the chaos, Betsy, who had been suffering from inexplicable physical disturbances, collapsed to the floor, her body racked with uncontrollable tremors. Her face turned ashen, her breath shallow, as if something was draining the very life from her. She whimpered, her body moving without command. John Bell, his frail body now resembling a shadow of its former self, gripped his wife's hand tightly. "Mary, this may be the end for us," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Darkness continued to engulf their home. Anne Kate Batts, with her unrelenting vengeance, would not rest until she had received the payment she had been promised. After that night, the Bell family found themselves on the brink of despair. Their home felt increasingly trapped in the grip of an invisible force, and every step they took felt like walking on fragile ice, ready to crack at any moment. John Bell, now just skin and bones, spent more and more time in bed, his body growing weaker, and it seemed there was no hope left. However, Mary, despite her fear, could not give up so easily. She decided to seek one last chance, something that might banish Kate Batts' spirit forever. After hearing rumors about a witch from a neighboring town, Rachel Linscott, who was famous for her ability to expel evil spirits with ancient rituals, Mary decided to invite her. Rachel, an older woman with a reputation in the town, arrived promptly. Wearing black clothing and her hair untied, she appeared serious, and her face showed a determination rarely seen. She brought with her several ritual objects: sea salt, black candles, and herbal potions to cleanse the house. After surveying the Bell family home, Rachel began setting up a protective circle, making sure there was no gap for the spirit to enter. "I won't lie to you," she said with a deep voice. "This spirit is incredibly strong, far stronger than I anticipated. This is not just an ordinary ghost, but a spirit filled with hatred and deep resentment." That night, Rachel began the ritual. She chanted ancient incantations, calling upon the powers of nature to expel the evil entities. The air grew heavier, colder, as if the outside world was trying to separate itself from this house. Suddenly, the terrifying laugh was heard again, louder and clearer. "You think I'll leave? I've waited for so long, and now I will take your lives one by one," the voice shouted, echoing throughout the house. Mary and the children froze, shocked. But Rachel remained focused, gathering her spiritual energy. She took the sea salt and threw it into the flame of the candle. The flame flared up momentarily, then extinguished. Silence filled the room for a brief moment. Then the sound of knocking returned, but this time the knocks came with such force that they shook the house. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was like thunder crashing against the walls, forcing them to cover their ears. Even Rachel felt something powerful trying to resist her ritual. Amidst the confusion, Betsy, who had almost collapsed, fell to the floor. Her face turned pale, her eyes wide open. A voice that wasn't hers came out of her mouth, the voice of Kate Batts, filled with hatred. "I will kill you, John Bell. No one can save you." Mary screamed and ran to hold Betsy's hand, but her daughter's body lifted into the air, as if being pulled by invisible hands. Rachel stepped forward, clutching the bottle of potion she had just prepared. With a voice full of conviction, she recited the final incantation, echoing throughout the house. "Spirit that comes in darkness, I banish you with light. There is no place for hatred here. Return to where you belong, far from this world." At that moment, Kate Batts' voice let out a horrific scream, a cry so loud that the walls shook and the lights went out. The air instantly became freezing cold, and it felt as if time had stopped. Then, in the eerie silence, the voice vanished. Rachel, out of breath, looked at the Bell family with exhausted eyes. That was no ordinary spirit. But I think for now we've succeeded in banishing it. However, even though Kate Batts had disappeared, the force that had possessed the house left a deep mark. John Bell lay weak, and Betsy, though freed from the spirit's influence, looked pale and dazed as though she had lost a part of herself. The Bell family's life never returned to the same after that night. Although Kate Batts seemed to have left, the effects of the terror they had experienced continued to haunt them in many invisible ways. John Bell, though his body remained weak and bedridden, never truly recovered. Every night, he woke up feeling as though his throat was tightening again, as if an invisible hand were binding him. Despite Mary's efforts to care for him, she knew her husband was deteriorating day by day, and it was not just due to physical afflictions but also the profound psychological trauma that had taken hold of him. Betsy, who had once been the primary victim of Kate's disturbances, also could not free herself from the shadows of the past. She often woke in the middle of the night, feeling as though something was watching her. Kate Batts' face, with eyes full of hatred, frequently appeared in her dreams, staring at her with an unrelenting vengeance. Even when Betsy walked outside, she felt as though something was following her steps. Mary felt increasingly isolated. While the townspeople began to forget the events that had taken place at the Bell house, the family could not forget what they had endured. Every step felt heavy, as if they were bound by something far greater than fear, a curse that was invisible, one that had changed their lives forever. The witch Rachel Linscott, though she had successfully driven Kate Batts away, had warned them not to assume the disturbance had ended. "The spirit may have gone," she had said, "but in truth, you've marked yourselves with something darker. There are things that cannot be erased, even after the ritual is finished." Mary didn't know what to do. Everyone in the village began to distance themselves, thinking that the Bell family had been stricken by madness. No one believed their story anymore. Kate Batts in many ways had won the battle, not only with her supernatural power but also by destroying the family's reputation. One quiet night, as the autumn wind rustled outside, Mary sat beside John, who was asleep in his old chair. Betsy, in the next room, was awake, her eyes staring blankly out the window. Suddenly, the familiar voice echoed through the silent house. But this time it wasn't Kate Batts' laughter. It wasn't a threat or violence. The voice said only one sentence: "I will return." Mary, sitting frozen next to her husband, felt her body go numb. The voice was clear, like a promise, a threat that could not be avoided. Nights at the Bell house grew even quieter. The sound of the wind rustling outside seemed more frightening, as if reminding them that although Kate Batts had gone, the darkness she left behind had not faded. John Bell, who should have been resting, was growing worse. His eyes, once full of life, now appeared empty and helpless. Every night, he woke up gasping for air, as if something was holding him back from sleeping peacefully. Mary, who now spent more time by his side, grew increasingly anxious. Would her husband last much longer, or was something worse yet to come? Betsy, who had once nearly been a full victim of Kate Batts, now felt a major change within herself. Every night, she felt as though some force was pulling her back into the darkness that had almost consumed her life. Though physically recovered, the fear never left her. She felt as though something was watching her every step, an unexplainable yet very real feeling. Mary decided to do something drastic, something that could free her family from the fear that constantly haunted them. She went to see Rachel Linscott again, hoping there might be another solution to save them. Rachel, though older, still possessed deep knowledge of the supernatural. She listened intently to Mary's story and after a while, spoke in a calm but serious voice. "Kate Batts, although her spirit may have left, she will not truly leave you. As I explained before, there is a trace left behind, a dark energy that binds your family. There is one way to truly free yourselves from her threat," she said, her face serious. "But it will not be easy. You must return to the root of the problem and learn more about Kate Batts." Mary was taken aback. "What do you mean? Haven't we done everything we could to drive her away?" Rachel shook her head. "No. What you did was only drive away the spirit that came, but not the root of the problem. Kate Batts is not just an angry spirit. She is part of a much deeper history, and to stop her completely, you must face her directly." Finally, after hearing Rachel's explanation, Mary decided to go to Kate Batts' place of origin, a neglected plot of land on the edge of the forest, where Kate had once lived. She knew that in order to end the curse, they had to uncover the long-buried root of the issue. With hearts full of fear, Mary and Betsy set off, leaving John behind at the house. When they arrived at the land, the air felt strange, colder and heavier. They saw the old house, now partly destroyed, leaving only rotting wood remnants that were barely recognizable. In the middle of the forest, there was a long-forgotten grave. A small tombstone made of black stone, bearing a name they knew all too well, Kate Batts. Mary felt her heart racing. "This is the place," she whispered. Betsy, already very anxious, felt something strange around them, a dark aura that was even thicker than before. The two of them began digging around the tombstone, hoping to find something that could explain what had really happened. After some time digging, they uncovered a small chest buried in the ground. When opened, it contained a very old letter written in faded ink. Mary opened the letter and read the words written in Kate Bat's hand. "I will not rest until justice is served. I will return, and this time I will demand more than just blood. I will demand every soul bound to this land." As soon as Mary read those words, they felt the air around them suddenly grow freezing cold. The sound of footsteps began to echo around them, and a fleeting shadow appeared between the dark trees. Kate Batts had returned, stronger than ever. As soon as Mary finished reading the letter, the air around them grew thicker. The sound of footsteps, now growing closer and clearer, echoed like heavy footprints. Betsy, standing beside her mother, felt her skin prickle. An unspoken fear filled their chests. They knew something terrifying was approaching. Suddenly, a large shadow passed between the dark trees. It moved swiftly as if waiting for the right moment to strike. Kate Batts appeared before them, her face twisted with hatred, a devilish smile on her pale lips. "You think you can just banish me?" Kate Batts' voice echoed, trembling between the trees. "I've been waiting for this moment. And this time I won't stop." Mary and Betsy stood still, not knowing what to do. Kate Batts seemed more real and stronger than ever. Her face, once full of rage, now wore a terrifying satisfaction. "Mary," Kate Batts' voice flowed like a whisper that disturbed their thoughts. "You will never escape this. I have become a part of this land. The land you inhabit, the land you love. This is a curse that will never end." Betsy, who seemed unable to bear her fear any longer, collapsed to the ground. Tears flowed endlessly, her body trembling with fear. "Mother, we have to leave, we have to go now," she cried, trying to reach Mary's hand. But Mary, though anxious, felt that this was the final test. They had to face Kate Batts, or they would continue to live in endless terror. With a trembling voice, Mary said, "Kate Batts, I know you want to destroy us, but you will never win. We will fight for our lives. We will end this curse right now." Kate Batts laughed loudly, her voice echoing around them. "You don't understand what you're facing, Mary. I am stronger than you can imagine." Suddenly, the ground around them began to tremble. The trees around them swayed uncontrollably, as if the earth itself was in turmoil. Mary felt a force rising from the ground, as if everything beneath their feet wanted something, wanted them. The earth was trying to pull them into it. Betsy screamed, trying to rise, but her steps were halted. A deep, heavy sound began to echo, like thunder rumbling in the sky. The ground around them began to crack open, revealing a massive gap that threatened to swallow them whole. "I won't stop until you become part of this land," Kate Batts said, her voice full of hatred, directed at Mary and Betsy. But just then, Mary remembered something Rachel Linscott had once said. "To defeat a powerful evil spirit, you must make it feel that it cannot control everything. Your strength lies in the courage to face that fear." With that thought, Mary gathered all her courage and planted her feet firmly on the trembling ground. "No, Kate," she shouted with all her might. "We are family. We have a strength you can't destroy. You've terrorized us long enough, and now we will end this." As soon as the words left her mouth, a bright light began to emanate from Mary's hands. The light grew stronger, and the quaking earth began to calm, as if halted by a force they had never felt before. Kate Batts, who had once seemed full of rage, began to retreat. "This is not over, Mary," Kate Batts yelled, her voice echoing as the light grew brighter. "I will return again, stronger than before." With a loud noise, Kate Batts vanished, swallowed by the blinding light. The air around them became calm again. The earth that had been shaking now felt peaceful. Betsy, trembling with fear, was finally able to stand. She looked at her mother with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Mother, did we succeed? Are we safe now?" Mary, who also couldn't believe what had just happened, nodded slowly. "Maybe, Betsy. Maybe we're finally safe, but we can't let our guard down. We must remain vigilant." However, in her heart, Mary knew, the terror of Kate Batts was not over. That dark power would always find a way to return. After the intense battle with Kate Batts, life in the Bell family home returned to a quiet stillness. Though the atmosphere was calm, the tension that lingered between them still felt heavy. The earth that had once trembled now appeared peaceful, but Mary felt that something was missing, something she couldn't touch but could sense in the air. Kate Batts might have vanished, but something bigger, something more terrifying might be lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike. John Bell, who had seemed weak before, was now slightly calmer. However, his eyes, which once burned with determination, now always appeared full of doubt. He sensed that even though Kate Batts was gone, the presence of darkness still hovered over their home. Betsy, though she had survived the terrifying battle, was still haunted by the events. Nightmares plagued her every night, and every time she heard the rustling of wind or the brushing of leaves, she felt as if Kate Batts would return, stronger than ever. Mary knew they were not safe. Kate Batts might have been held at bay for the time being, but a greater force than her might still be present. Hidden, waiting for the right moment to return. Mary also realized that they had to face more than just an evil spirit. A darker power, tied to the very land itself, might have formed a bond so strong it could never be broken. One evening, as they sat around the fireplace, Mary spoke to John. "I feel that something bigger is here, John. Kate Batts was just a part of something more terrifying." John, who had been quiet up until now, nodded slowly. "I feel that too. We drove her away, but somehow I don't feel at peace." At that moment, Betsy approached, her voice trembling with fear. "Mother, Father, there's something strange outside. I feel like someone is watching us." Mary and John immediately went outside to check, and as soon as they stepped onto the ground, the air felt different, colder, darker. They saw a large shadow pass between the trees, but it moved so fast they couldn't make out its form. "What is that?" Mary asked, her voice shaking. But before they could answer, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble again. They felt something even bigger than before, as if something had awoken from the depths of the earth. A rumbling sound started to rise from underground, booming like thunder from an unimaginable depth. Mary felt her body stiffen. "We have to leave, John. We have to go now." But John stared at the ground with a serious expression. "No, Mary. We have to face this. We can't keep running." The ground around them began to split open, and from within it emerged something far darker and stronger than Kate Batts. A shape that couldn't be recognized, a giant shadow made of darkness itself. The voice that came from the shadow was no longer Kate Batts, but something deeper, more terrifying. "Do you think you are free?" the voice echoed, full of hatred and endless rage. "I am a part of this land, and you will never drive me out. I am the older power. I am the true inhabitant of this place." Mary and John, though afraid, stood firm. They knew that this time, they weren't just facing an angry woman's spirit, but a much older, much stronger force, something that had existed since ancient times. "Who are you?" John asked, trying to stay calm. "I am something more than just a spirit. I am the fear created from every step ever taken upon this land. I am the trace of every death, every suffering that has occurred here. I am the forgotten justice and the darkness that has been embedded in this earth for centuries." With these words, the ground shook more violently, and the shadow drew closer, ready to engulf them in eternal darkness. But in her heart, Mary knew they had to fight, no matter how great the power they faced. Their courage was the only weapon they had left. After hearing the thunderous dark voice, Mary and John stood tall, trying to gather their courage. The ground around them continued to open, like the mouth of a giant ready to swallow them whole. The dark shadow emerging from the earth grew larger and more terrifying. The force they faced this time was not just an evil spirit, but an older, more powerful entity, something born from the prolonged suffering and death that had plagued this land. "We won't be able to escape this, John," Mary said, her voice trembling but filled with determination. "This is more than just Kate Batts. We have to stop this before it's too late." John nodded, though fear filled his chest. "We have no choice. If we don't face this, we'll become part of this darkness forever." Betsy, who stood behind them, felt a deep fear. But something inside her, perhaps from her experience with Kate Batts, made her realize that they couldn't just give up. "Mom, Dad, we have to find a way to stop it. We can't keep living in fear." Betsy's words gave them a bit of strength. With bated breath, they began searching for a way to fight back against the dark force. Mary remembered Rachel Linscott's words, who had once said that to defeat such a power, they had to dig deeper into the history of this place. They needed to uncover what had bound this force to the land and uproot the curse. However, the giant shadow continued to draw closer, covering the sky with darkness. The rumbling sound grew louder and more terrifying. "You will never be free of me," the voice screamed, echoing through the forest. Mary grabbed Betsy's hand, and together they ran toward the dense forest, hoping to find something that could help them. John followed quickly, though his fear grew deeper within him. They knew they were on the brink of destruction if they couldn't find an answer. In the middle of the forest, they came across a large stone, older than anything around them. The stone was carved with ancient symbols they didn't recognize. Mary felt a strange power emanating from the stone, as though it itself was part of the land, long forgotten. "This is it," Mary whispered. "This is the source. This stone is the center of the power bound to this land. We have to destroy it." However, as they approached, the dark shadow appeared once again, drawing nearer. "You cannot destroy me with this stone. I've been here longer than you know." With a deep, menacing voice, the shadow drew closer, ready to strike. But Mary knew that this was their last chance to stop the curse. "We have to destroy it now," Mary shouted. Betsy, who had grown accustomed to the fear, felt there was one last way to defeat this power. With renewed resolve, she stepped forward and placed her hand on the large stone. "I won't let you win," she cried with all her might. Unexpectedly, a bright light shone from Betsy's hand, merging with the stone. The stone began to vibrate violently, and the dark power surrounding them began to diminish. The terrifying rumbling sound slowly faded. The large shadow screamed, its voice filled with anger and hatred, but the light coming from the stone grew stronger, enveloping the darkness. "You cannot defeat me," the voice echoed once more, but this time it was weaker. With one final push, Betsy shouted, "It ends now." The stone shattered into small fragments, and with it, the dark power that had haunted the Bell family vanished. The air, which had once felt tense and heavy, now became calm. The darkness finally lifted, and the land around them returned to peace. Mary, John, and Betsy stood in the middle of the forest, unable to believe what had just happened. They knew they had gone through a harsh trial, but now they could feel a little safer. However, even though the darkness had gone, they knew that their lives would never be the same again. They had faced it and survived, but the scars from that experience would remain. After the great battle they faced, the Bell family felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. The land that had once felt full of threats now returned to a calm, as if responding to their victory. However, even though the darkness had disappeared, the profound impression of the battle still haunted them. The air around them felt lighter, but the memories of what they had experienced would never truly fade. Mary and John stood in front of their house, gazing into the distance. They felt a peace slowly returning, although the emotional scars from everything that had happened were still clearly felt. "We did it, John," Mary said quietly, her voice filled with relief and exhaustion. "But I feel like something is missing." John nodded, though his face seemed calmer than before. "I feel it too. We've defeated Kate Batts and that dark force, but nothing can erase these bad memories." Betsy, standing beside them, stared at the ground with a vacant expression. "I feel like we'll never really be able to forget everything. Every step feels full of that shadow. Maybe we can move on with our lives, but everything feels different." Mary sensed the unease in Betsy's words. They had fought together to defeat the darkness, but now they had to learn how to cope with the trauma they carried. Although they had managed to banish the force, its impact remained, leaving scars on their souls. However, they knew that life had to go on. They had to start rebuilding their home and their lives, even if it meant facing uncertainty about their future. One evening, Mary and John sat together, trying to talk about what came next after everything that had happened. "How can we move on after all that's happened?" Mary asked, her voice full of doubt. "I don't know, Mary," John replied. "But we can't keep living in the shadows. We have to find a way to heal." Betsy, who had been listening to their conversation from a distance, came closer. "I want to leave Mom, Dad," she said quietly but firmly. "I want to go somewhere far away from everything that happened." Mary paused for a moment, reflecting. "Are you sure, Betsy?" Betsy nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I can't stay here anymore. This place is full of bad memories. I want to start fresh." John and Mary exchanged a glance, as if they both knew that this was the right decision. They had been bound by the haunting shadows for too long, and maybe it was time to truly break free. They decided to head to a city farther away, far from their old home, a place that was more peaceful and full of hope. While they couldn't erase all the fear and trauma, they knew they could begin to build a new life, far from the darkness that had bound them for so long. However, even though they left Tennessee, they knew that their journey was far from over. The dark force they had faced might have vanished, but the world was still full of mysteries they couldn't explain. They would have to continue walking carefully, striving to find peace in a life filled with uncertainty. With every step they took, they learned that although they couldn't control everything, they still had control over their courage to continue living, even though their past kept chasing them. After leaving their home in Tennessee, the Bell family began searching for a quieter place to start a new life. They chose a small town located away from the hustle and bustle, far from the darkness that had once haunted them. Their new home was simple but comfortable, with views of vast green hills. It was a place full of peace, far from the tensions they had once experienced. However, even though they were in a much calmer place, Mary felt there was something she couldn't let go of. Every night, as the sun set and the wind began to blow through the cracks in the windows, she felt as if something was watching them. Small noises, like the rustling of leaves or the creaking of doors, always reminded her of the disturbing sounds from their old house. John also felt the same unease. He felt that although they had left all the cruelty behind, the land they now stood on wasn't entirely safe. "We can stay here, Mary," he said one night, "but I feel like something's not finished." Mary looked at John, her eyes filled with doubt. "I feel it too. But how can we move on if we're still haunted by that shadow?" Betsy, who had started to adapt to their new environment, occasionally visited the secluded places around town. One afternoon she sat under a large tree outside their home, feeling the cool breeze. But even in that peaceful place she felt something was wrong. There was something she couldn't explain, a feeling that even though they were far from their old home, it still lived within them. "Why can't I feel free?" she thought, feeling as if an invisible bond was holding her back in the past. The tension grew when they began meeting the local townspeople. The people in the small town were friendly, but there was something strange in the way they looked at the Bell family. It was as if they knew something that had not been told, or perhaps they simply sensed that something was different about the Bell family. Some people often stared at them with curiosity but never spoke further. One night, after feeling the same unease for days, Mary decided to take a walk alone around town. She went to the small church located in the town center, hoping to find some peace. When she entered, the air inside the church felt cool, but also filled with a profound silence. Inside the church there was an old priest cleaning the altar. He looked at Mary with a sharp gaze as if he recognized her. "There is something troubling your soul, Mrs. Bell," he said in a soft voice, yet full of understanding. Mary was startled and stared at the priest. "How do you know my name?" The priest only smiled faintly. "I have been here for a long time. People here often bring burdens they cannot release. But for you that burden seems heavier. It is the curse you carry with you." Mary fell silent. "How do you know about that?" she asked again, her voice trembling. The priest nodded. "I can sense that darkness within you. No one can escape a curse that is so strongly bound. Even when you move to another place, that darkness will follow you, unless you face what has begun." Mary felt her body go weak. "So, will we continue to be haunted like this?" she asked in a voice of despair. The priest nodded slowly. "There is no place safe from the shadow of your past. But if you want to end all this, you must face what has happened in a way you have never tried before. You must return to the place full of memories and search for what is hidden there." Mary was stunned by the priest's words. "Return there?" she said with hesitation. "After everything we've been through?" The priest simply stared at her with a gaze full of empathy. "Sometimes we must go back to the darkest place to find the light. It is the only way to truly heal." With those words, Mary felt her heart grow heavier. Did they have to go back to their old home? Could they really face that darkness again? But despite her doubt and fear, Mary knew they would never truly be free until they confronted it. If they wanted to move on with their lives, they had to finish what they had started. After her conversation with the old priest in the church, Mary couldn't sleep well that night. The shadows of their old house, the haunting sounds, and the dark forces that had destroyed their peace of mind flooded her thoughts once again. The priest was right, they would never truly forget what had happened. Without resolving everything, they would continue to be haunted by the shadows of their past. Early the next morning, Mary spoke to John, recounting the priest's words that echoed in her mind throughout the night. "We can't keep running, John. If we truly want to be free, we have to go back to that place. We have to face what's there, even if it's terrifying." John was silent for a moment, contemplating his wife's words. He knew this was a difficult decision. They had left Tennessee hoping for freedom and peace, but the reality was that that freedom only existed in their minds. "I don't know if we're ready to go back there," John said finally. "But maybe you're right. Maybe this is the only way." Betsy, who had overheard their conversation from a distance, approached them. Her eyes were full of unease, but she knew this was the decision that had to be made. "I feel the same way," she said. "All this time I've still felt its presence. That darkness hasn't really gone away." They all agreed. The Bell family would have to return to Tennessee. They had to face their old house, the place where all the darkness had begun. However, even though they knew this was the step they needed to take, none of them were truly ready for what they would find. Their journey back to Tennessee felt long and heavy. They passed familiar roads, but there was no longer any sense of comfort that they once felt. Their hearts were filled with fear, yet there was also a strong resolve to end it all. They knew that only by returning and finishing what they hadn't, could they truly live in peace. When they arrived at their old house, the atmosphere was very different. The house looked the same, but now it felt darker, heavier. The ground around the house seemed to swallow the sunlight, leaving behind a gloomy aura filled with bad memories. The Bell family stood before the house, feeling the tension they had long avoided. Mary stared at the door of the house with mixed emotions. "This is the place that destroyed us," she said, her voice choked. "But we have to go in. We have to finish this." John nodded, his eyes filled with worry. "I don't know what we'll find inside, Mary, but we have to be ready for whatever it is." They stepped forward, entering the house that had once been their refuge, but now felt like a place full of darkness. As they entered the living room, the air felt heavy, as if something was watching them from behind the walls. The sound of slow footsteps echoed on the old wooden floor, and they knew they were not alone. Mary led the way, her hands trembling but full of resolve. "We need to go to the basement. That's where Kate Bats first appeared," she said. They made their way to the basement, passing through a dark and musty hallway. When they reached the basement door, they paused for a moment. Mary took a deep breath and slowly opened the door. Inside, the room was dark and filled with dust. However, they could feel an incredibly strong presence, as if something was waiting for them. Suddenly, a chilling laugh echoed from the darkness, and the Bell family jumped in shock. "Do you think you can escape your fate?" the voice whispered, full of hatred. Kate Bats, or rather, the force that had haunted her all this time, appeared before them. But this time, it wasn't just Kate they were facing. There were more dark forces hidden behind her, something older, stronger, and more malevolent. "You will not stop what has been started," the voice boomed, and the darkness deepened. Mary, John, and Betsy stood side by side, ready to face what lay ahead. They knew this was their final battle. They would not leave this place until everything was finished. As they stood in the dark basement, the oppressive darkness grew stronger. The eerie laughter deafened their ears, and the atmosphere around them was filled with deep hatred. Mary gripped John's hand, and Betsy stood beside them, feeling the unspoken tension. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared before them, not Kate Bats, but something larger, more terrifying. The figure emerged from the shadows, with a face almost unrecognizable, as if its body was made from the darkness itself. "So, you've really come back, huh?" the voice whispered with disgust. Mary stared at the figure, feeling her body weaken. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice full of fear but also determination. "I am the guardian of this darkness," the voice sounded full of hatred. "You who have disturbed the balance of nature. You who could never accept your fate. You will never be free." John tried to calm himself, though he could feel the cold air wrapping around his body. "We're not leaving. We came to end this," he said, his voice full of resolve. The figure laughed louder, and suddenly the air around them felt even more suffocating. "Do you think you can defeat something older and stronger than you? You're just ordinary humans. What can you do?" Suddenly the entire room began to shake. The wooden walls creaked and strange sounds echoed around them. Mary felt as if the whole world was collapsing around them. In that darkness, the figure began to move closer, its body growing larger, casting a huge shadow that covered the entire basement. Betsy tightly held her mother's hand. "We're not afraid anymore," she said, her voice trembling but full of courage. "We've been through enough. We won't give up." Mary looked at her daughter with pride. "We can fight this, Betsy," she replied. "We have a power greater than they think." The figure laughed again, louder, as if mocking them. "What power do you have? You are only human. There is nothing that can defeat this darkness." However, as the figure drew closer, Mary felt a strange power beginning to grow inside her. Something that had long been buried in her heart, a power born from the desire to protect her family, to end the suffering they had endured. "We're not alone," Mary shouted, and instantly, a bright light illuminated the basement. John and Betsy felt the change, and together they raised their hands. The sounds around them began to fade, replaced by an increasingly strong energy. The power growing within them collaborated, creating a shield of light that protected them from the darkness. The figure paused for a moment, shocked by the unexpected power. "What is this?" it screamed, its voice cracking with fear. "This is the power that comes from us," Mary said firmly. "The power of love, family, and hope. We will not give up, no matter how dark this world is." With those words, the light from their bodies grew stronger, and the darkness around them began to tear apart. The figure tried to resist, but the power radiating from the Bell family was too much to hold back. Slowly, the figure began to disappear, burned by the light that emanated from their hearts. Finally, with a burst of bright light, the figure vanished. The darkness that had ruled the basement disappeared, leaving a tranquility they had never felt before. The house, which had once felt full of fear, now seemed different, brighter, more peaceful. Mary, John, and Betsy stood in the middle of the now empty basement, their bodies exhausted but their hearts filled with relief. "We did it," Mary whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "We're free," John replied, his voice full of emotion. Betsy hugged both of her parents. "Finally we can start living again," she said, her voice full of hope. They knew that even though this battle had ended, their journey wasn't over. But for the first time, they felt that they could move forward without being haunted by the shadows of their past. After the final battle that ended the terror they had endured for years, the Bell family stood in the middle of their old house, feeling a peace they had never known before. The house that was once filled with strange noises and darkness now felt different. The rooms that had once been full of fear were now brightly lit, giving them a sense of new hope. Mary took a deep breath, feeling the weight that had long bound her and her family finally lifted. "It's finally over, John," she said, her voice full of relief. "We're free." John, who stood beside her, held her hand tightly. "We can start a new life. We can rebuild everything without the fear that haunted us." Betsy, who was standing behind them, looked around in awe. "This house feels different," she said, her eyes shining. "There are no more dark shadows. No more fear." The Bell family knew that even though their journey had been full of trials, they had emerged victorious. They had defeated a force greater than they had imagined, and now they could move forward with hearts full of hope. They decided to leave the house, not with fear or anxiety but with pride. They had succeeded in driving the darkness out of the place that had once been the source of their suffering. The house now stood as a symbol of their victory, a victory of love and unwavering courage. After leaving the house, the Bell family started a new life in a small town far from Tennessee. They opened a small farm and lived a peaceful life, away from the dark forces that had once threatened them. John and Mary worked hard to tend to their land, while Betsy, now more grown up, helped them with enthusiasm. Years went by and the Bell family grew happier. They had the peace they had long dreamed of, and they knew that they would never again be haunted by the past. Their home was now filled with laughter and happiness, a strong and united family. One sunny afternoon, as the sun began to set, Mary sat on the porch of their house, looking out and reflecting on the long journey they had been through. She felt peaceful, more peaceful than she had ever imagined. "We've finally made it," she said to herself, smiling gently. John came over and sat beside her. "Yes," he replied. "We've been through all of it together. Nothing can separate us now." Betsy, who was playing in the yard with her friends, ran over and jumped into her mother's lap. "Mom, Dad," she said with a wide smile. "I'm so happy we can be together like this." Mary hugged Betsy tightly, feeling her heart fill with happiness. "We are too, darling," she answered, her voice soft. "We are so grateful." The Bell family knew that they had walked a path full of suffering, but they also knew that they had overcome it all with an unwavering strength, their love for each other. They had found the peace they had always been looking for, and now they were ready to live the rest of their lives with hope and happiness. That night, as they sat together at the dinner table, their laughter and conversation filled the air. There was no longer any darkness haunting them, only deep peace and true happiness. And so, the story of the Bell family ended with a happy ending. They had defeated the darkness and now lived in the peace they had longed for. No more terror, no more fear, only love and family that would last forever.